Well, the computer prompt tells me I'm live, so I'm going to believe what it says. Hopefully, it'll work. I've never done this myself and been successful, so we'll try it. So, welcome to Grace Baptist Church. This is the Adult One Bible Study class, and we're going to be in John chapter 12 today. It's a very good study, so get your Bibles ready. If you have a lesson book, we're on session number 1. First study of our spring unit, and it starts on page 10 and goes through page 18. We'll be using that to refer to occasionally. Glad you're here with us online and in person, and we'll be starting in just a few moments. I got to write a few things on the board. I apologize, I'm a little bit behind on my prep, but that's the way it goes when you got things you got to do first. So, Tina, do you have a book?
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
You guys have books, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, my nose like he's doing
Tina, how often do you all take or bring in for the food pantry?
I try to go, bringing in, just tell me, and then I gather it at home. I take in about every 3 weeks.
Every 3 weeks, okay.
Yes. So, yeah, anytime you want to bring anything, just say, hey, grab this from blah, 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 or set it on a chair, or set it here and I'll grab it, or whatever.
Oh, okay,
Okay?
all right, thank you.
Which reminds me, I should do that this week. Live stream is not on yet. And that was 3 minutes ago.
I can't help that.
If you go to your.
It says it's on.
And it goes here where it goes through the stages of where they have Jesus. And-
Everything says it's working.
And Friday
So,
morning, he's
guess what?
crucified,
Let me see if I can bring up the
and
live
so you
stream.
have Friday.
Guess what?
afternoon,
We're good to go, and I'm not going to worry about it.
Saturday
Okay.
It's recording, so if nothing else, I can have it recorded on
Friday
my
morning, Saturday
Yes.
morning, and then we have
laptop,
Sunday
and we'll
morning.
load it up later.
But it goes through the different
Tell them to
stages where
contact
he
Lee.
says- so you're thinking of Thursday night.
That's it.
So Thursday night is,
I show we're on.
where is one at?
Well, that tells me Matthew is
Oh,
not
there's
working
one.
correctly, so Matthew needs to get his
He's
thing together.
over here in his.
Oh, he just sent me another text.
Then he's here.
He's just jumping the gun.
And so-
We were on right at the right
Oh, that's
time.
cool. I like that.
Look, it says, let me know if you need tech support.
All right. Well, I think we're doing just fine today, so we'll just continue on. And if Matthew can catch up, that'd be great. I think we're working. You said it's working when you look.
Yep, I'm watching us now.
Now, he's got the issue there. Somebody's having a fun time. Who is that? Oh, that's us.
No, that's us. Okay, I'm gonna log off. I show us alive and well. I'm watching us now.
Tell him to get an updated computer.
I have a feeling he's pretty up on that.
I know, I'm just joking with him.
A couple weeks ago, my ex was over, and he was complaining about my laptop. And he goes, "I don't understand why you deal with this." Well, Larry, you're not here to keep me up to date.
Then don't deal with it.
I
Your
know.
laptop.
I know, right? Oh yeah, I looked at prices of new laptops. I'm gonna wait till mine dies.
Yeah.
Do they ever really die?
Pour enough water on them or smooth enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing. They eventually get to the point where you can't do updates and things. So, I think for right now, let me see, is there anything else I need to jot down?
All right, he says we're good now.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Now I can rest easy.
Yes.
All right. Again, I'm glad to have everyone here today in the classroom and online. And as I said before, this is Grace Baptist Church, the Adult One Bible Study. And I'm glad that you're joining us today. We'll be in John chapter 12. And the study is called, Why Wasn't This Sold? And we're going to look at the main idea that Jesus is worthy of our worship as the promised Messiah, the Son of God. We'll be looking at these 3 points. Honored, verses 1 through 3. Question, verses 4 through 8. And division, 9 through 11. This is all in John chapter 12 today.
We're up and running.
We're up and running. No, don't.
You're not focused.
Oh.
Okay. Well,
You can focus if you
go
like.
ahead. The trouble is you're looking at a Wi-Fi image, and even though it looks tack sharp on that, sometimes the Wi-Fi is not so good. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, it's.
Go ahead and focus. I've gone through this a couple of times already. Go ahead and see if you can focus good here.
I'm here.
Which one is the focus?
I
The
don't
back
know.
one?
I have no idea. But I would look at the left screen because the right screen is probably going to be a
Correct.
little bit fuzzier.
See me for a minute.
We're having tech support show up, so stand by. We'll be starting in just a moment.
That's right.
3 hours later.
No, we'll just do with a little fuzziness if that's the case. It should have been focused because I didn't touch a thing on that
Yeah, I
barrel.
know. But it happens.
Well, you know what?
What's the one? Dun, dun,
There you
dun,
go.
dun, dun,
Yeah,
dun,
that's the
dun,
Jeopardy thing.
dun.
When they're
That's
thinking
it.
of that final
That's it.
Jeopardy. Are we good?
Should be.
All right. Thank you, tech support. All right. Appreciate it, Lee.
Do that.
So, we are, like I said, on session number 1 today in your lesson book. Should be an easy one to find if you're looking at that. And we're going to begin with a word prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time of studying your word, Lord. Thank you that we can see these things and learn from them, especially in John's gospel account that focuses so much on you, Lord, and the love that you had for us and that you died for our sins, Lord. Just pray for those that are on their way here. Keep them safe, Lord. Be with those that are at home and those that are here in person. And I just pray that you would be edified by our discussions and what we learned today. In your Son's name, amen. All right. So, the title, Why Wasn't This Sold? What do you think that alludes to, just off the top of your head? Now, if you've read the lesson, you already know.
It was the perfume.
Ah, the perfume. Exactly right. And we're going to be talking about that in some more detail here. But to get us started about this, I got a question for you. What did you have for dinner last night? Can you tell me what you had for dinner last night?
I had hot dogs.
Hot dogs! All right. I love hot dogs.
I have been craving chili dogs.
But
Right? I don't-
Did you have chili dogs?
No, I
Oh.
haven't yet.
Anybody else? Do you remember what you had last
I
night?
skipped dinner.
What's that?
I skipped dinner.
Oh, skip dinner, okay. Well, you know, it's really funny because sometimes I think back, what did I have for dinner last night? It's one of those things you just do, you don't think sometimes, right? Unless you prepared it, then you'd know. But I happened to know because when I was working on that part of the lesson, shortly after we had dinner. So I had roast beef, green beans, and couscous. Have you ever had couscous before?
Couscous, yes.
Yeah,
Oh, it's-
not
it's-
fond of it.
Oh, well, we get the herb and garlic or something like that. It's delicious. I add butter to mine and salt because otherwise it's a little bit. So, but yeah. Anyway, dinner. Dinner is an interesting topic, right? So we're going to look a little bit about dinner here in our intro paragraph. I'll go ahead and read that for us, and it's on page 10 if you do follow along.
Is it called supper or dinner?
Well, dinner, supper, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to get in that dispute. Also, I apologize. My voice is a little rocky this morning. I've been having a lot of sinus drainage. It's kind of clogged my throat up. But I'm doing better than I did when I first got up this morning. When I first got up this morning, it was like this. I said, oh no, I can't do my lesson like this. Please, Lord, bring my voice back. And my voice is back. Of course, it helped that I sucked down 2 Ricolas already and had some honey and lemon.
There you go.
I got some nice hot tea right here.
Me too.
Anyway, on our introduction here, it says on December 22nd, 1874, President Ulysses S. Grant and his wife Julia hosted King, now I'm going to butcher this, so you guys are native Hawaiians out there, I'm sorry, Kua, there we go, of the Sandwich Islands, which is also known today as Hawaii, for the first official state dinner at the White House. I think it means the first official state dinner hosting them, but it might have been the very first dinner. I kind of doubt that. So one can imagine the amount of preparation that went into that meal. You know, here's the king of the Sandwich Islands, right, visiting for the first time, by the way, the United States and going to the White House. This is quite an event. Few questioned the presence of the taste testers that were required by by King Kalea to make sure the guest was honored appropriately. There was certain things, the White House researched this a little bit apparently, and they found out you have to have taste testers in the king's presence to do these things. And it was to honor him because you're following that tradition. It's a very important thing, right? So anyway, we will find a way to honor those we believe to be worthy of being honored, won't we? Won't we? Yeah, we sure will. So it asks the question, what is the most formal dinner that you have ever attended? What is the most formal dinner that you've ever attended or been to? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
My father was way far up within the Masonic Lodge.
Ooh, I bet that was a formal thing. Yeah.
Yes, and when he president for the first time, there was a very formal. We had
Right.
He was in his tux, and
Mm-hmm.
we had to wear dresses, and
Probably funny hat.
I'm not a hat person. But
Masons
it was-
are known for that sometimes.
Yes.
Shriners especially.
Yes, there were quite a few Shriners
Yeah.
there. It was one of the first times
I think
that
called it fez.
that a friend of both my father's and my fiance, who was a Mason and a Shriner, they asked, I need Mr. Chapman to stand up and I need Mr. Falk to stand up. Their children are getting married and they haven't met yet.
Oh.
So
It was quite a big ordeal, wasn't it?
it was a
thing.
huge thing,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? Yes.
Anybody else?
It was intimidating, let's put it
Yeah,
that
it
way.
can be, right? If you've
Yeah.
never seen that before. Yeah.
There was, I think it was at Alameda where the Marines are.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And my husband and I went there for a dinner. Everybody
Wow.
was dressed in their blues and stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, when I was thinking about this, of course, I thought of wedding. Sometimes the reception is kind of a semi-formal thing. It's kind of a big thing here too, right? But when I was in the Air Force and I graduated from the NCO Academy, it's kind of a big deal, I guess. And this was somewhere like, I don't know, somewhere in California, one of the bases out there. But I experienced what was called the Air Force Dining In ceremony. Now, for those of you who haven't been in the military before, this is a little bit of what you're talking about, I think. But the Air Force calls it dining in. It's also a dining out. There's also another dining in that's less formal. It's combat dining or something. I can't remember. But the dining in is kind of the formal thing. And I wrote a little bit about it here in the handout on the first page. But I'll go ahead and read this for those of you at home who don't have the handout. The Air Force dining in ceremony I attended, and it made a lasting impression on me, and that's for sure. A typical dining in is held at any unit level. It could be the wing, which is the largest one, the group, which is kind of the middle, or the squadron level, which is the lowest level of organization in the Air Force. This is the most important, most traditional, form of Air Force unit social events. Attire will be the formal dress uniforms, and rules, traditions, formality, and ceremony are to be fully followed. Now, I did some research on this because I couldn't remember all of this. This is many, many years ago, okay? And there's a whole slew of thou shalt and thou shalt nots. It's amazing. I mean, all this formality and tradition. And they say that this came from early in the medieval times when the knights would have their formal dinners and stuff like that in England and such. And so it has long history, military-wise. Anyway, so a proper dining in for the Air Force includes these hails and these farewells, as well as honors and recognition for achievement. That's why I was there. I wasn't the only one. There's a bunch of people that graduated that particular time frame. And so we were all there, and our commanders came too. So our commanders came from whatever base we were at, and I think at the time I was at Beale Air Force Base. And so my commander flew all the way down from there down to Southern California to attend this, just for me. You understand what that means? That's an honor, okay? And the ceremony served the purpose of enhancing what they call, this is a French term, esprit de corps. Esprit de corps. Ever heard that before? Basically, it's meaning the morale of the unit. It inspires enthusiasm, it inspires devotion, unity, pride, and a strong regard for the honor of the group. Officers and non-commissioned officers wear the mess dress uniform, which is a more formal than the regular dress blues that the Air Force has. If you want to call it their business suit that a lot of people wear in the Air Force. They wear their dress blues or a variation of it. But the mess dress was the finest. It was a special coat, special pants. If you think of a tuxedo with all the military stuff put on it and special badges and everything, that's what it was. And that's probably what the Marines have a version of this. I don't know what they call it. You have to Google it someday.
They had their swords too. I go,
Yes.
oh my gosh.
The Marines would have their swords and all that stuff. And they would, various times, they would stand up and they'd raise their glass, and everybody stood up and they raised their glass, and they'd all toast for whatever it was. And all these amazing, these traditions and stuff that they had. Anyway, so I was involved in that. So that gave me a real taste of what a formal dinner is. We're going to look at a special dinner that was given. And the special dinner was given in honor of basically two people, primarily Jesus and also Lazarus. And this happened sometime a little bit after Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. Remember we talked about that a few weeks ago or last week? So was that a big thing?
Yeah.
It was a very big thing. Remember, Lazarus had been dead for not 1 day, not 2 days, not 3 days, 4 days. And was it Martha or Mary, one of the two, said, Lord, we can't open that up. By now, he really stinks. You can't do that. But we know Jesus is the Lord of all. He knew already what he was going to do. Even though he knew, remember, he wept. He wept. And it was a very, very important thing for Jesus, because he was his friend, and he saw what had happened with everybody in mourning and grief over the loss of their, especially Mary and Martha, over the loss of their brother. Anyway, so that's kind of the setting here. About the formal dinners, though, would you feel comfortable being the host in something like that? Not me. That's a lot of responsibility. How about the guests? Would you be maybe more comfortable being the guest perhaps instead?
No, I like to be in the kitchen.
Yes.
There's a lot of formalities and stuff, and like I said, a lot of rules in some of these things. You got to be careful. If you violate them, you suffer the consequences. One of the consequences is you have to, if you violate something in the Air Force, Diane, you have to. They told you, okay, you violated such and such. Master Sergeant Ellis, you must go to the grog, and it's this bowl with grog in it, and it's horrible stuff. I mean, it's this yucky tasting. They put mustard in it along with fruit punch and all the kinds of yucky stuff. There's an alcoholic one and a non-alcoholic one, so you can dip which one. And they make you drink that stuff.
Oh, man.
Anyway, so you want to do it the right way, right? So being a guest has got a lot of problems there too if you're not careful. But anyway, so what are some ways that we demonstrate honor to people in our culture today that you've seen?
On a very informal way, we shake their hand.
Right? Yeah. Good.
Now it's the elbow bump. Or the foot.
I think we're back to handshaking.
I think we're
more
back.
than
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Okay. Perhaps if you're in an organization of some sort, let's say you work for C-Tran. Let's say there's a meeting, C-Tran meeting, and the boss says, I want Tina to come forward here. She gets this award because she hasn't missed a day of work or whatever it might be. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
They'll give you, in front of everybody, they'll give you special recognition or something like that, right? Something like that. You've probably seen things like that. In the Air Force, again, I think in the Air Force we had what they call commander's call. Commander's call, we'd all line up in formation. We'd all, go to attention and all that stuff. The commander would come out there and he'd give us, parade rests, and we wait and we wait and we wait, and they talk about all these things, and then they call people up to give them special honors and stuff. So it's similar to that. Any other things like that that you've been involved in? I know on TV I've seen Channel 12 do this thing where they show up at somebody's work, and because they heard of what a good job this person was doing with
Yes.
helping out the homeless shelter there, or the food giveaway program, or whatever, or maybe the Toys for Tots, they would show up with all kinds of special gifts, and they'd put this person on TV, and they tell them that we heard about you. So you have things like that too. Sometimes people get write-ups in the newspaper. You know, that newspaper is that old thing with paper form you used to open up and read every day. Now I guess they get a posting on their social media site. I don't know. I miss the paper. It's still out there, but it costs so much.
It does.
Anyway, so we do that, right? In our culture, we honor people in certain ways. Today's study, we are starting a new quarter, but we're continuing our study of John's Gospel. I'm so glad about this, by the way. I wasn't sure until I saw the material. I said, oh, right, we're continuing the rest of John. That's because I would have hated if we got halfway through John. Okay, now we're in Hosea. I mean, I like Hosea, don't misunderstand me. But I wanted to finish John. So that's great, we're doing it. The last quarter ended with Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, right? That was chapter 11. In today's study, we examined something that happened not long after that. Jesus was the honored guest at a dinner in Bethany the week before his death. But what John emphasized was a startling act of worship and generosity, along with Jesus' response. Okay? Just because we're starting a new unit, so I want to point out a couple things real quick. The outline of John, I think I included it in your handouts. I think it's handout number 2. So you can find out where we are on that in our handout. We are chapter 12, right? So we're on that second point, presenting Christ as a Son of God. And I think we finish up on that one. We're probably going to the next one after that. That's on handout number 2. And I also have a copy of here. Ta-da! There's the poster. Also, what else do we have? A timeline. This gives us an idea of where these things happened. And we're not going to necessarily use this. This is mainly for you. But if you're following along, you wonder, where are we, Norm? Well, we're in the timeline where it says 33, AD 33, in that center column. Jesus is arrested, tried, and crucified. After 3 days, he's raised from the dead. We're not to that part exactly, but we're really close to that part. So we're right around the 33 AD mark in our timeline as well. And the last item is our first century Sabbath laws. And this is, again, just something for you to look at. It's very interesting. But remember what Jesus was accused of doing. What was he accused of doing?
Working on the Sabbath.
Breaking the Sabbath. And that's one of the most strongest of the Jewish religious traditions, laws, rules, commands, whatever. And so he broke it. Not just in their mind. Not just once. Not just twice. Not just 3 times. But many times. He broke it. Of course, in their mind, he broke it. I think he amplified it.
Yeah.
You know, any case, we'll talk about that probably here in a little bit when we talk about some of the things about him. Jesus is coming in his public ministry, the focus of several chapters, the first chapters of John's Gospel. Beginning with John chapter 12, the focus is now shifting towards the last week of Jesus' life on earth. This is a really interesting study of the Gospel of John, by the way. John doesn't always go with chronological events. That kind of throws some people off. It's by idea a lot of times. But the first part was all the lead-up, 1 through 11. Now 12 through 20, I think it is, the last chapter. It's 20 or 21, I can't remember. This is all about when Jesus came to Jerusalem, and prior to his arrest, and then his arrest, his trials, and he went through, and his crucifixion. That's a huge part of John. That's like the last half of the whole gospel account. We don't see that in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. They do more of a chronological, this happened then, and this happened then, and this happened then, where John's like, this is the main idea. I want you to know something. Remember, why did John write the gospel account? These things have been written so you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So that's John's motto, almost, you might say. That's why he wrote this gospel account. So he wants to make sure that point's gotten across. And that's why he spends so much time on that, which I'm glad he does.
So this is the John that Jesus, the one that Jesus loved.
Yes, yes. This is the Apostle John's account.
Right, okay.
Exactly right. So anyway, so this event we're going to talk about took place about AD 33, like I mentioned. Just before Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead. Bethany was where Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. It is a setting for this banquet that we see in today's important verses. And so let's go ahead and let's look at that first point. You know what I didn't do?
You didn't hand out.
I didn't hand out verses. So, you know what? Can I have, I got verses to hand out, but I didn't cut them up.
Are they in the bullet, in your,
Yeah, they're in the handout.
Okay.
No, they're not in the handout. I apologize. Part of them are in the handout. But I do have them listed up here. These are the verses here. So who would like to do the first one, verses 1 through 3? Any volunteer? You do that one? Okay, you got the first one. Who wants to do question 4 through 8?
oh, okay.
You got it? Okay. And then the last one, division 9 through 11.
I can
You got that one? Okay.
Or whoever.
I do have some additional verses somewhere. Here's my verses things I was going to cut up. Didn't work out so good, did it? The additional verses are right here, so I will. I'm going to hand you this one, Steve, if you don't mind. Can you do that one, and I'll take this rule along, okay? The first two when we get to it. And you can look it up in your own translation, obviously. All right, now, I knew I was forgetting something. What am I forgetting this morning? Oh, no. I forgot to get the verses out. So, we talked about where this happens. Where this happened is in Bethany, right?
Yes.
And Bethany, well, we don't have a good map here for Bethany. Bethany is this way. It says to Bethany. So Bethany was not far from Jerusalem. It was like an easy day's walk, I believe. If you look at the map, you should be able to find that. I think if that's the one I'm thinking of. I have to look up in my maps to be sure. But it's not far away. And Jesus' friends lived in Bethany. And who was his friends again? Lazarus and Mary and Martha. That family was very dear to his heart, right? So let's look at something else here. I'm going to read a little bit about the context of what we're going to be talking about. If you want to read it as well, it's on page 11. But this is a banquet that he's going to. He's being honored. Why do you think Jesus might have been honored? What happened just before this?
Lazarus.
Yes, he raised Lazarus. So Lazarus and Mary and Martha feature prominently in what we're going to talk about today. And this is in a house of a person who had enough room to host this. And this person's name was Simon. And Simon, it says Simon the leper. And that doesn't mean he was a leper. It means he was currently a leper because he couldn't be there. He was. Most biblical scholars believe that Simon was one of these people that Jesus healed early on. And so Simon wanted to also show his gratitude. So he's hosting this thing. You had to have a house that was an area big enough for anywhere from upwards of 20 people because these things were events. These were events. And it's usually it's like a portico, they call them. And there'd be like a low wall all the way around this area where the table was. And the table was a U-shaped table. And there's a name for that, and I forgot what it's called now. Somewhere in here it talks about that. It's a tri-something. I don't know why they call it that. U-shape known as a triclinium. And it talks about that on page 12. And they would recline on usually these pillows or maybe a mat around this U-shaped table on the outside. And the host, the people serving, would come into the thing, and they'd go from place to place around the inside of this table, and they would give, if they were running out of something, they'd bring something extra, stuff like that. And so that's the layout. And you'd recline. You wouldn't sit at the table. You see a lot of pictures of this event, and they're sitting at a table. Nope. They weren't sitting, they were reclining. And when they reclined, they do it in a specific way. Everybody would. And you'd recline on your left elbow, essentially, at the table, on this cushion, this low table, and you'd eat with your right hand. That's how everybody did it. So what would your feet be doing if you're reclining? They're out this way somewhere, right? They're off to the side. So that's the picture. We have these people, these honored guests, and these probably the people that wanted to honor them around this table. Now, these portico areas were, like I said, had a low wall, but they were open, and so people could look inside, and they could also walk in and line the area around where this was going, because this was an event. It wasn't a closed private thing, like the disciples went in the upper room and closed the door. It wasn't that way at all. This was an event. So they're doing this dinner to honor Jesus and to honor, by the way, Lazarus. Lazarus is now alive, and they want to honor their friend. So that's what's going on here. Does everybody understand this? So when the word got out that Jesus was attending this thing with Lazarus, who he raised from the dead, what do you think happened in that little town?
Yeah, it was a big deal.
It was a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah,
People,
everyone came to see.
and my guess is people came even from Jerusalem when they heard this was happening, because Jerusalem was not that far away. So they came to see what was going on, essentially. So that's kind of the setup for that. Anyway, then we see something interesting happen. Two things. Martha, who is the one that likes to always fix things, you're uncomfortable? Well, let me get a new pillow. You know, your glass is empty? Let me fill that for you. Martha was that person. Mary, her sister, was the opposite end of the spectrum. She was the one who, oh, Jesus is here. Oh, I want to sit at his feet and listen to him. Oh, did you hear what he said last week? Yeah, he's talking about this now. You know, she was that kind of a person. So she was different from Martha. And so Mary was there and Martha was there. Martha was serving because that was a task that needed to be done. And she was one of these people that want to make sure everything gone right because they're honoring her brother and Jesus. But Mary did something different. Mary went to the feet of Jesus and began to anoint his feet. We're going to talk about that in a little more detail here. There's one thing I want to talk about, though. Sometimes there's confusion. There's two accounts where there's a banquet, dinner type of thing going on, and both of the people whose houses it is, his name is Simon. However, they're not the same account. You just got to be aware of this. This is Simon, formerly the leper, and the other one is Simon, a Pharisee. And it's in two different places. It talks about that here. It says that this account is paralleled in Matthew 26 and in Mark 14. Lazarus was a special guest, and we see all these things that happen. But there's another narrative in Luke 7:36 through 50 that people confuse this. And this is, I call it the second banquet, or another banquet. Maybe a better word, another banquet. Or the Luke, a banquet talked about in Luke. Because the Simon there is a Pharisee. He's not a former leper. If a Pharisee would not, if he was a leper, would not have that standing anymore. He would not be a Pharisee, first of all. And is the difference with the place it happened, the people who were there, and the purpose. All those things play into the fact that this is not the same event. So don't be confused by those two things. And Simon being a very common name, it's not something that you would think is out of the ordinary. Just, who else do we know with the name of Simon, by the way?
Simon the Zealot.
Simon the Zealot, yeah. And there's another one too. Very famous Simon.
Simon Peter.
Simon Peter, yeah. So Simon is a very common name. So like I said, don't get confused with that aspect of it. Judas was a common name, by the way. There's Judas Iscariot, and then there's another disciple called Judas not Iscariot. I would want to be the Judas not Iscariot. But Judas was also another form of Judah. So was a very, very common name as well. There's a lot of them. Matter of fact, Jesus was a common name. There's been a couple other Jesuses before that. There was one called Simon Bar Jesus or something like that. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, all that to say, this is what this setting is showing us, okay? So here comes Jesus. He comes to Jerusalem, where remember we talked about this a little bit last week. He spent a lot of time, my other map's gone, in the Galilee area. Remember our other map? I should have left that other map up here. In the Galilee area, which was in the north, right? Why did he do that instead of spending more time down in the Jerusalem area?
They didn't like him in Jerusalem.
That's right. And they were seeking to do what?
Kill him.
Kill him. So he spent a lot of time in that northern Galilee area. But now he's in this area of Bethany, which is not far from Jerusalem, because, that's where he raised Lazarus. But this was something that was a risky thing for him to do. Now, Jesus is in charge of everything, including his own trial and his own death and when he died, all that stuff. And we know that. But there's still a risk involved. And so people are saying, why is he here? You know, there's a hubbub about that. And I think that's also another reason why there's a crowd of people. There's a crowd of people watching this whole event. And we don't think of banquets in that way. We think of banquets in a different way. But this is quite an interesting event to come to. And they didn't have TV. They didn't have movies. So what was their entertainment? Let's go down there. There's a cool banquet going on there. We can see some stuff, especially this one. All right, so that helps us understand that a little bit about the two different accounts here. Also, another significant thing is the Passover celebration. Okay, this was before the Passover. So in that area of Jerusalem, what do we know what happens in Passover time?
It was the killing of the firstborn in Egypt.
Right. But as far as people goes, there's suddenly this big influx of people to Jerusalem. Because that's the center of where they're going to worship
Kind of
the
a
Passover.
festival type.
They estimate that this city increases by over 100,000 people
Wow.
back then. Is that a lot of people? Yes, a lot of people. So it fills up not just Jerusalem, but the outlying areas. Probably Bethlehem, probably Bethany. They actually would also rent out things like caves to people and stuff like that because there's no other places for them. You know, and so it's interesting to what's that?
If I got a cave for you.
Well, you know, it's better than nothing, I guess. So, excuse me. First century Sabbath laws, I want to touch on that briefly here before we get into these verses. And that's our last handout. It talks about these things here because this was the thing, the main problem they had with Jesus, right? He violated their sacred commandments. And the most sacred of all of them was remembering to worship correctly on the Sabbath. And so they had that against him. They had these very, very legalistic rules, and there's a series of bullet points here that I'll let you read yourself later on, that they were said you can't do this on the Sabbath. You cannot wear a nail-studded wooden shoe on the Sabbath because this would constitute as plowing because one of those nails might be loose, and it might dig the dirt as you walk. You know, there's a whole list of those kind of things. So he broke laws, not just the main one, but also these other ones in their mind. Of course, we know that's not true. Let's look at these first three verses. And notice the way Jesus was honored. Now, did you read that already? I can't remember.
No,
Okay, go ahead and read those first three.
Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they made him a supper there, and Martha was serving, but Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Mary then took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume.
Wow. This is quite an event, like I said. This is 6 days before the Passover. So things were getting exciting out there, right? Things were prepping for this big event, this yearly event of the Passover. And they were waiting for that time that they could do these this time of honoring what God did for them during the time of the Exodus. And that's what we're talking about in the Passover, because remember, somebody mentioned already, the angel of death would come over, and if you didn't have the blood of the lamb
Over the door.
on your doorposts,
Yeah.
the firstborn would die. And of course, in Goshen, people did that, because that's where the children of Israel were. But throughout Egypt, there was the wailing and wailing and wailing of people who lost their firstborn. Now this is quite an event. So they're thankful that God did that for them. Now I'm going to see if I can find Bethany. Yeah, Bethany is basically to the east and south of Jerusalem. So when you come out of Jerusalem, you go sort of on a diagonal down a little bit, and you'll see Bethany there. It's further down would be, and that's kind of the reason why there was so much risk here, because you could easily walk there and the people could come and get him. And remember what they said. They said if anybody here, any Jews know where Jesus is, you are obligated to tell us so we may arrest him. That edict had already been gotten out. So even having this banquet was what?
Dangerous.
Dangerous. Very dangerous, yes. So in these verses here, and you read that, right? Yeah. So we see 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany. Lazarus was there. Jesus had raised him from the dead. Okay, they made a supper there. Now it wasn't just a regular supper. This was a special deal. This was with all the trappings, if you want to call it that. They wanted to honor Jesus and Lazarus. And like I said, Mary was serving. And Lazarus was one of the special guests because he was reclining at the table with Jesus. But we see that Mary did something different. What did she do?
She anointed Christ's feet.
That's right. This is something that very, very different has happening now. This does not happen at these special events. It would be like me going to the dining in that I went to in the Air Force, and somebody just came off the street in regular clothes, came up, and said, "Hi, everybody. I'm just going to sit right here at the head table." No, you don't do things like that. That breaks all the protocols, right? And what did she do? She came in not to serve. She came in and laid herself down at his feet. Remember, his feet are off to the side, right? And she does something very, very interesting. She took what's called a pound of costly perfume. It was called nard. Now, what is nard? Anybody know?
A really thick oil, maybe?
Yeah, it's a special concoction here. I know I had it here
Nard
somewhere.
was an oil derived from the root of a tree.
Yeah, it's okay. Oh, here it is. Mary used a pint of pure nard. This is my Bible commentary. This fragrant ointment was made from the root of what's called the spikenard plant, which is from India, and this is a rare herb type of thing. And it was imported from India. These kind of things were. And the idea about this thing that she had, that she broke open, it was sealed. Now it was sealed for a reason. It was a special thing. Do you know how much this cost? Well, it says 300 denarii, and that's probably close. But what is 300 denarii? I looked it up. Currently, that would translate to about $6,000 or plus dollars.
Wow.
So this was probably something that she had that she would live off of. The money from that later on in her life. It was maybe part of her dowry. I don't know. It was a thing that she had probably saved and scrimped. Maybe inherited from her parents before her or something like that. We're not given all the information about that, but it was something that was very valuable. I've also heard much higher amounts than it could have been, and so I don't know. But I'm going to go with the $6,000 plus. So she took this and she broke it open. Once you break it open, that's it. Okay? She broke it open and she started to put it on his feet. Why was she doing that? What do you think?
One was an honor thing.
Uh-huh.
She needed to honor the Christ, her
Right.
Savior.
Right. And now she did it to show her gratitude, probably primarily, and her love. Because remember, she was probably the most in tune person in the family, other than maybe Lazarus now that he'd been raised from the dead, of who Jesus really was. He's not just a good rabbi. He's just not a prophet. He's somebody who could raise the dead. 4 days after they've died. And by the way, after 4 days, you're dead. The idea was maybe after 2 days or so, you might recover. Maybe 3. But after that, your spirit's gone. You're dead. And so he showed he was master over life itself. So that didn't get missed by Mary. Mary is so grateful and knew who he was, I think, in a large extent, more than almost anybody else, to the fact that she wanted to show her dedication to him and how she realized who he was. And so that's why she did it. She did it out of her love for him. Does that make sense? And she was taking a big risk here because she did something very interesting. Not only did she approach him and touch him, which is a big no-no, but she anointed her feet because she wanted. It was a very common thing to have your feet washed, and probably his feet were washed before coming there, knowing the kind of thing it was. But she wanted to make extra sure, and so she washed it with perfume, a special perfume, and she then dried off.
She uncovered her hair.
She dried.
That was.
He dried off his feet with her hair. That's another big no-no, by the way. You do not let your hair down. It's usually put up and it's covered.
Concealed.
And she took the covering off her head, she undid her hair, and she dried off his feet. And she's probably crying at the same time. And she's drying off his feet with her hair. You did not do that in public. A woman who did that in public would be in big trouble. If a woman who is married did that, let her hair down in public, the husband had every right to divorce her. And nobody would question it. It was that big of no-no. You didn't do that. But she didn't care. She didn't care. To her, it was more about honoring Jesus and what Jesus did and who Jesus was than it was about following any rules, any convention. She wanted to honor Jesus with her gift. What do you think about that gift she gave him? As far as honors go at a banquet, do you think that was probably number one? Mm-hmm. Now, everyone would have said, wow, look at what she's doing. You'd think there'd be nobody who would think otherwise, right? Well, there's a term that you've probably heard before, and it's haters gonna what? Hate. Yeah, we know that one, right? Haters are gonna hate. In other words, no matter what, if you're a hater, you're gonna find something bad. You're gonna see that cup's always half empty to you. You know, there's always a rain cloud over things, right? So it means that somebody is always going to complain or find fault with something. As it turns out, what's true in our time right now is also true back then. Someone at the banquet had a problem with Mary's extravagant gift and worship, and we're going to see who that is. I bet you can guess already, maybe. Who's got number 2?
I've got it.
4 through 8.
All right. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have, but me you do not always have."
Wow. So somebody questioned this extravagant gift that Mary gave Jesus. And it was this person named Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot, he was one of his disciples, right? And yet he was the one who was intending to betray him to the Jewish leaders. He already had that in mind, didn't he? It was already in his thought. And why do you think he was planning to do that? What's one of the reasons you think why?
Get some money out of it.
Is it 30 pieces or 20 pieces of silver, whatever it is, shekels, whatever the going price was, I can't remember what it was. But yes, that was the word. The word is, if you can betray Jesus to us, we'll give you this amount of money. Now, it talks about Judas here. Judas was all about the bucks. All about the Benjamins, we would say. In other words, he wanted to make sure he got his take plus. He was one of these people who was governed by this word called greed. Greed. Have you known anybody like that in your life? Who always had the angle of what's in it for me, how can I get it, maybe that extra buck?
Always keeping tabs on what's owed them and that kind of thing.
Yeah, always concerned about those kind of things. You know, and I've come across a couple of people that, and it just amazed me, and it kind of startled me sometimes when I found out that they don't really care about anything other than getting money for them. And that's a sad thing, especially if somebody says they're a Christian and they're consumed with greed. And that's one of the things that the Bible tells us to beware of. Beware of allowing greed to rule your life. In one of the places Jesus talks about a rich man and how a rich man is more difficult for the rich man to go into heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, it says. And that's a very ludicrous image. It's a very hyperbole type image. It's easier to do that than for a rich man to go to heaven. So that tells you how much greed had a hold of people's hearts, right? And this is who Lazarus was. It says right here, he was a person who was concerned with money because it says he was a thief. And he was in charge of the money box. Now this is all John talking about this, probably from retrospect later on. John at the time did not realize this. He realized this later on that this has happened. And that he used to steal or pilfer what was put into that money box. So in order for the group of disciples to do what they had to do, they depended upon people donating to them, right? And so somebody would have to be in charge of those funds. And so Judas said, I'll do it. So he had the money box, right? So remember when they went to this one place in Samaria, and Jesus stayed at the well, and the rest of the disciples went into town to get food? That's what they were doing. They take the money box with them, and they're going to buy that food and come back. And he met that woman at the well. Remember that? Anyway, that's another story. So let's move along here. But Judas was a thief, and he wanted what was put in the money box. And he said, what did he say? Was this perfume? If this perfume could be sold for 300 denarii. A denarii is what you could earn in one day if you were an average worker back then. So you can calculate that out, and I didn't do that. But find the average wage today, and find out how much that is a day, and multiply that by 300, and that's what you'd have approximately. It's around 5,000 to 6,000, somewhere around there, and probably with inflation more now. But he was saying, hey, we could get this money and give it to the poor. Do you think that's really what he was intending to do with that money?
Probably most to him, or all of it.
He was going to skim something off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was what was in his heart. He wasn't concerned about the poor. It says he was not concerned about the poor. And Jesus says something interesting that some people have taken and not really understood it. Some and they maybe take issues. It says, therefore, Jesus said, and he said it to Judas, by the way. It says, let her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For you will always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. Does that mean that Jesus doesn't care about the poor?
No.
What do you think? No? I heard one person said no. He does care about the poor. Many times, over and over, he would be helping the poor at different times and stuff. So he's not saying don't help the poor. He's saying in this particular instance, Mary understands more than you do that this is an important thing. Mary didn't have full idea about it because she wasn't thinking about his anointing after death, by the way. That's no indications here that that's necessarily the case. Some people think it might be, but her concern was her great love for him because what he had done. He had raised his brother from the dead, and she knew who he was. He was the Messiah. But beyond that, it wasn't. She was probably just like everybody else, startled when he was arrested and killed. But Jesus knew. Jesus knew what was going to happen, and Jesus knew that this was an anointing that would help him in that aspect. What the curious thing here is, if you read the accounts of when Jesus was crucified, they didn't have time to anoint him with the thing. They put basically the spices and wrapped around hurriedly and stuck them in the tomb. They didn't get a chance to do it. The woman came after Sabbath was over to do that on the third day. Remember? So nobody had had a chance to properly anoint Jesus except for Mary. Think about that. Mary was the only person who did that, was able to do that. That's kind of interesting. And so, yes, Jesus is concerned for the poor, but he knows that at this particular time in history, at this particular time, this was something that needed to be done. And this Nard would do this a good job of this. Now, one of the things it says here, where was that? I think I might have missed that part. Oh yeah, the last part of the previous one. It says, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So this is a very, very, very aromatic perfume. Anybody ever notice that when like somebody maybe put some perfume on and then they walk past you? You ever notice?
You go, whoa.
When I worked at Edwards Air Force Base, there was a lady there who was a contractor. She was in charge of Kentron or something like that. And every time she came in and walked past, you knew it. I don't know what she used, but boy, could you tell. I mean, and you'd go, whoa, what was that? It was one of those very aromatic things. And she wanted to be noticed, I guess. But this was something that was... Now, there's an old song, I say old, it's from the 70s. And I forgot the guy's name. I was going to look it up. It's a gospel writer. And he writes about when Jesus appeared in the room, upper room, suddenly with the disciples. And he says, and the room was filled with the smell of perfume. Because Jesus was there. The perfume that had been on his body. Still would fill the room. It was that kind of thing. Exciting to think about. Exciting to think about. And Mary was the person who did that. Interesting. Let's look at the last verse. Wait a minute. Did I get those other verses? Oh, I did a. I think no, that's coming up still. Did we do 4 through 8? Yes, we did do 4 through 8. Matthew 26, 8 through 9, and Mark 14, 4 through 5. Go ahead and read that for me, Steve.
Matthew 26. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. And Mark 14, 4 and 5.
Yes.
Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And they rebuked her harshly.
So this is showing you it wasn't only Judas, perhaps. Some of the other disciples may have thought the same way. Maybe Judas was leading them to that direction. They were thinking the same thing. Another verse I have is Deuteronomy, but I don't think that's what I'm going to worry about since it rang the bell on me, and it's just a side one. So we're going to skip that part. The Bible teaches that we should always look for occasions to help the poor. But, that's what it was. Deuteronomy talks about helping the poor. But we should also have the responsibility to honor Jesus through our giving and our worship. Because John included her in this story, we know what Mary did, and we can follow her example. Let's look at the last one, 9 through 11.
When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came, not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. Many of the Jews were going away and believing Jesus.
So we see in this particular verses here, and I'm going to briefly talk about this, is that this large group was there. Remember I told you it's like an audience watching this whole spectacle, right? And there was a division. Some said what? Wow, this is interesting. There's the guy I heard about that had died, and there's the man who raised him from the dead. And some of them did what? Because of that. They believed, right? But some of them did not. Even though they saw it in front of them, a lot of them saw the miracles Jesus did. They still wanted to do what with Jesus?
Kill him.
Put him to death, right? Put him to death. Because of something else, they were also going to kill Lazarus. And what was that? He was an example of what Jesus did. A real, tangible example of what Jesus did. Right in front of them, he was proclaiming what Jesus did. They had to silence him too. So it said, they all not only planned to kill Jesus, they also were going to put Lazarus to death. Now, did he get killed by them later? I don't know. There's nothing in the Bible about that necessarily. But I would assume not. He probably, maybe was in hiding, maybe. I don't know. I'm just guessing here. We don't know for sure. But it says, verse 11, but on account of him, that's Lazarus, what had happened? Many of the Jews were going away and were believing in Jesus. Wow. Because of him. Because of what Lazarus said. Because of what he showed them, right? Can we also be a Lazarus in that sense? Has Jesus brought us back from the dead?
Yeah.
Yes, he has, right? Spiritually speaking, he has. This is the summary points. We'll be closing after this. Christians should humbly honor Christ as Lord. That's the first one. That's what we see Mary did, right? Second, Christians should affirm others who worship Jesus. It's exactly right. And third, Christians honor Christ by testifying to others about his work. Did Lazarus probably testify about what Jesus did? You bet he did. And Mary and Martha were witnesses too. They did the same. Because of that, they wanted to kill Lazarus as well. Sometimes we face persecution, folks. That's a fact of life. And we need to be ready for that as well. But we also not need to shrink back from when we feel the Spirit telling us, hey, this is the person I want you to talk to. I want you to tell that person how Jesus saved you. Lazarus would do it. We should do it as well, right? Any comments or questions on these?
I think that was real good.
Yeah. Great one. And filled with all kinds of implications for us as Christians, right?
Yes.
So, anyway, closing. Think about this. This is a rhetorical question. Don't answer it necessarily. Think about it. What are some ways that we, maybe as Christians, can show our devotion to Jesus? Is there maybe some ways we can do similar things that Mary did? We can't physically do it, I know. But we can do similar things maybe that would show that kind of devotion too. Our challenge from our today's study is to find ways that we can show devotion to Jesus in our lives. Let's have a word of prayer when we dismiss. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this example we see from Scripture, Lord. How Mary took that better route and how she showed that her deep love for Jesus and what Jesus had done for her in her life, and brought her brother back. And Lord, later she realized how Jesus had died just for her. Thank you so much for that. We know that in our lives as well. And Jesus is worthy of our worship, Lord. We see that Mary was doing that as well. I just pray that you, Lord, help us to honor Jesus purposely, not only just in our quiet times, but in corporate worship, but in our lives in general, so we can be that light to the world that doesn't know you. In your Son's name I pray, amen. Thank you all for being here. This is the Adult One Bible Study. And stand by. We're going to have Pastor Lee this time, because Pastor Matthew is away from us at this point doing his Air Force duty. And so be standing by the same YouTube channel, and you'll be able to listen to Lee Heeman. And that's all I have. So have a great day. God bless you all.
Stream has ended. All right.